Welcome back. Today, we're counting down the deadliest shark attacks ever recorded. From a bride whose dream wedding photo turned into a nightmare above shark-infested seas, to a graduation trip in Brazil that ended in tragedy, despite a rescue already underway.
It happened on April 3rd, 2024, off the coast of Gansbaai, South Africa. Clear skies, light swell, the kind of morning that looks perfect in photographs. 6 tourists got on Daniel Dale's boat. They wanted to see one of the most incredible animals in the ocean. They planned to watch it through a thick, clear wall of acrylic. When that boat came back to port, one of them was not on it. Daniel was a former marine fisheries researcher who had moved into cage diving tourism. His commercial license had expired 4 months earlier and was never renewed. Because renewal required an inspection, he knew the boat wouldn't pass. He was running paying passengers on a research permit that explicitly prohibited it. Standard industry protocol capped cage groups at 4 passengers. A rule built around a simple fact: 4 people could be briefed properly and pulled out fast if something went wrong. Daniel ran 6 because 6 paid better, and no licensing body was checking his manifests since his boat wasn't registered as a tourist operation at all. There was no safety briefing beyond a rushed rundown on the dock. No emergency drill, no plan for a fast extraction. The acrylic pod itself was secondhand, welded together from old research parts, never certified for tourist use. A safety inspector had flagged the seam junctions in a written report 8 months earlier. That report was filed, but nothing changed because research vessels weren't enforced the way licensed tour boats were, and Daniel made sure his paperwork kept it that way. The 6 tourists that morning came from very different lives. Nora Ashford, 52, a retired British accountant who had just come through cancer treatment. Liam Carter, 29, an Australian wildlife photographer. May Lin, 34, a Singaporean scientist studying shark behavior. Ethan Clark, 41, an American tech entrepreneur. Sofia Alvarez, 27, a Spanish travel blogger. And Khalid Nasser, 45, a UAE executive and certified diver. 6 different people in a pod meant to hold 4 on a boat that wasn't legally allowed to carry any of them. And sadly, none of them knew it. The crew put out a chum line heavier than any regulated limit allowed. Within the first hour, several great whites appeared far off, moving in slow, wide circles around the scent. Then, one big female, maybe 14 or 15 feet long, started getting closer. The acrylic pod sat just below the surface, moving gently with the waves. She began making tighter and tighter passes near the pod, returning again and again to the same lower seam where the panels met the frame bolts, the exact junction the inspector had flagged 8 months earlier. Never reinforced, never replaced. Daniel and the crew thought she was just being curious. She was. That didn't matter as much as they thought it would. Then she hit the pond. Once, a single pass, head on, full weight into the side panel. That one impact was enough. The latch of the flagged seam had never been rated for anything beyond static water pressure, and even that rating belonged to a research-grade specification, not the modified pod. Now, holding 6 people instead of the 4 it was built for, it gave way instantly. The door swung open into the current. Nobody had been briefed on what to do if the seal failed, because nobody had planned for it to fail. Panic took over, and panic in a group rarely stays individual for long. One person bolted for the surface, and the rest followed in the same half second, the way one moving body in a crowd pulls everyone else into motion behind it. 5 swimmers kicking for the same patch of light didn't look like 5 people escaping. They looked like one tight, thrashing cluster, all moving the same direction at once. That was the mistake. Spread out, even a few seconds apart, they might have had a chance. Together, they looked like a single shape worth investigating. The shark came back around and passed through the cluster once. Liam took the main bite closest to her line of approach, full clamping force. Sophia, just beside him, caught a shallower secondary bite as the strike continued past him. Ethan was hit by her body rolling through the group, the impact alone enough to fracture bone before any tooth came near him. Khalid caught the edge of her tail as she turned away, tearing his shoulder. May, at the outer edge, was raked along her side by rough skin rather than teeth. One pass, one animal moving through a cluster of panicked swimmers. 5 very different injuries, depending on exactly where each of them was standing in the water when it happened. Due to the impact, it drove the air out from their lungs, making them inhale water. Nora never left the pod. The same impact that blew the door open threw her against the interior frame. She struck her head and went still. While the others were being pulled from open water, she was already taking on water she couldn't escape. Unconscious, unable to surface. She drowned before the crew got the pod up. The shark never touched her. She never even left the cage. The boat returned to port under emergency protocol. 4 survivors needed immediate trauma care. 1 did not survive at all. It genuinely shocks me how such a nightmare can happen in the blink of an eye. What followed was less an investigation than an unraveling. No valid license, a research permit masking an illegal tourism operation, a pod with a known structural flaw left unfixed for 8 months. 6 passengers in a pod that should never have held more than 4, with no briefing, no drill, no plan. Daniel was charged with operating illegally, fraud, falsifying safety records, and negligence, resulting in death. His operation was shut down for good, and regulators used the case to close the exact loophole that had let him run unchecked for years.
It was the afternoon of March 14th, 2017, aboard the luxury cruise ship during a private charter crossing between Martinique and St. Lucia. The vessel had been booked for a wedding party of 38 guests, celebrating the marriage of Solange and Renaud Marcelin. Solange Marcelin was 27 years old and worked as a junior accounts coordinator at a shipping import company in Fort-de-France, Martinique. At work, she was precise and detail-oriented. Outside the office, she was impulsive, physically confident, and constantly chasing content for her social media accounts. Friends described her as athletic and fearless, someone who treated every vacation like a production shoot. She had left the wedding reception still in her gown. The ceremony had taken place on shore that morning, and the group had boarded the ship immediately afterward for a celebratory crossing. Solange had been photographing everything since before the ceremony began. By mid-afternoon, she had already climbed onto a lower deck railing twice for photos while guests watched nervously. Both times Renaud pulled her down. Both times she laughed it off. I want to pause here because this detail matters more than it seems. Renaud wasn't being overprotective. He was reading the situation correctly, and she already knew that, which is why she laughed instead of arguing. The idea that had been building all day finally came out around 3 p.m. She told a group of friends she wanted a Titanic photo, but better, not just standing on the railing with her arms out. She wanted to be lifted. The plan was for Renaud to stand behind her on the railing and hold her up by the waist while she extended her arms outward and leaned forward over the water. She wanted height, movement, and the ocean behind her. She had seen a version of it online and had been thinking about it since boarding. Renaud refused immediately. Solange found a cousin willing to help instead. The two of them climbed onto the outer railing of the observation deck near the stern, while guests gathered around them with phones raised. The railing stood just over 4 feet high. Solange climbed above it and positioned herself on the narrow exterior ledge in her wedding gown and heels, while her cousin gripped the railing behind her. The ship was moving through moderate open water, with wind gusts around 25 miles per hour. The deck surface was damp from sea spray. She extended both arms outward and leaned forward. That's when the ship passed through a wave swell at that moment, and the deck tilted. Solange shifted her weight to compensate, and her heel caught the wet metal edge wrong. Her cousin grabbed for her, but could not hold her. She went forward, over the railing, and fell from the observation deck into the ocean below. The drop was approximately 55 feet. A jagged metal drainage bracket protruded from the hull several feet below the railing. Solange struck it on the way down, opening a deep laceration across her left side before she hit the water. The impact of the fall itself caused further injury on entry. Blood spread rapidly through the surrounding water. Oceanic white-tip sharks are acutely sensitive to blood in open water and can detect it across significant distances. One reached her before rescue boats were deployed. It tore through her legs and her hands. Crew members threw locator lines and triggered the man overboard alarm within seconds. Rescue boats were deployed within minutes, but lost visual contact with Solange quickly in the ship's wake and rough surface conditions, and recovered only fragments of fabric from the water. Her body was recovered 2 days later. The recovered remains showed multiple traumatic injuries, though investigators could not determine precisely which occurred during the fall and which resulted from subsequent marine activity. The condition of the remains was consistent with open water shark scavenging. The condition of the remains was consistent with post-mortem marine scavenging. Her body was repatriated to Martinique. Renaud was hospitalized for 10 days following her death. The medical examiner recorded her cause of death as drowning and traumatic injuries consistent with a fall from height, with subsequent marine activity noted as a contributing factor. Investigators concluded the incident resulted entirely from a passenger voluntarily climbing over a safety barrier. No citations were issued against the vessel.
It was August 22, 2018. Off the south coast of Reunion Island, a routine paragliding flight above the volcanic shoreline would end in an emergency water landing in waters known for repeated shark incidents. Marcelin Ferrou was 44 years old and operated a small independent paragliding school on the island. He had more than a decade of instructional experience, nearly 900 logged flight hours, and a reputation for being cautious and methodical. Divorced and living alone, he spent most of his time teaching, maintaining equipment, and flying familiar coastal routes he had repeated many times without incident. So the flight starts off pretty normal. He launches from a coastal ridge above Petite Île, and the plan is just a standard run, landing a few miles down the shoreline. Conditions look stable, light offshore wind, nothing really unusual. On the ground, a 19-year-old assistant is basically tracking the whole thing over radio from the landing zone. And yeah, people there are already pretty cautious with overwater flights in that area because of frequent shark incidents along the southern coast. I keep thinking about how calm everything probably looked from the ground at that stage. Just another clean launch against the coastline. But then things start shifting. A sudden sea breeze pushes Marcelin farther offshore than expected, and then wind shear kicks in and he starts losing altitude steadily. At that point, it's clear he's not making it back to land. So he calls it, declares a water landing, while emergency services are already being contacted. He goes into the ocean, maybe about 1,000 feet offshore. He comes up through the collapsed canopy, manages to free himself, but one leg strap is still stuck around his right ankle. A fishing vessel sees the landing and starts heading his way, but they're still a bit too far out to reach him quickly. For several minutes, he stayed conscious and swam toward shore while clearing gear. The trailing strap continued to move beneath him as he swam. Below the surface, a large tiger shark was moving through deeper offshore water. That detail, the strap is still trailing, always sits in my mind as something that, well, changes how exposed someone is in the water like this. The first contact came without warning, a sudden upward strike from below that destabilized him and rolled his body in the water. He resurfaced, disoriented, trying to orient toward shore, not really understanding what had just hit him, only that something had violently knocked him off balance in the water. A single severe bite then took his lower left leg below the knee, causing catastrophic crush injury with likely tibia and fibula fractures and extensive soft tissue destruction. The limb was rendered non-functional immediately, and rapid blood loss began as he struggled to keep himself afloat in choppy offshore water while a fishing vessel closed the distance. The shark did not re-engage after the initial bite. He remained in the water with severe trauma until the vessel reached him and crew members pulled him aboard, beginning emergency first aid. At this point, I keep thinking about how quickly rescue is coming can stop meaning much once you're actually in the water like that. While emergency services coordinated a helicopter evacuation to a regional hospital. Even with rapid extraction and surgical intervention, his injuries were not survivable. Marcelin died later that day from hemorrhagic shock following severe lower limb trauma consistent with a large tiger shark attack in offshore waters. Investigators classified the incident as a single shark encounter influenced by low visibility, drift conditions, and the presence of a trailing harness and collapsed canopy. He initially survived the attack and was successfully extracted from the water, but his condition deteriorated rapidly due to severe blood loss before and during rescue. Despite emergency medical care and helicopter evacuation, the injuries were not survivable. The trailing harness strap and offshore drift were noted as contributing factors that increased exposure time and reduced situational control in low visibility conditions. His death prompted renewed discussion within the island's paragliding community regarding overwater coastal routes during variable wind conditions. A safety advisory was later issued recommending reduced offshore exposure during coastal flights, though no formal restrictions were introduced.
It was August 4th, 2015, 1.2 nautical miles southeast of Marathon, Florida. The water was flat under a clear sky, with no other vessels visible in any direction. Celeste Grabsky, 41, worked at the front desk of a dental practice in a coastal suburb of South Florida, handling scheduling, billing, and non-stop patient calls. She kept her hair tied back during work and wore it loose on weekends, and had spent years asking her husband to take a proper anniversary trip away from their routine life. Tomek Grabsky, 44, a warehouse supervisor and licensed boat operator, had rented a mid-sized offshore vessel for their anniversary trip and stopped at a marina beforehand to purchase a large bucket of mixed fish scraps intended for attracting marine life. He later told investigators he had not clearly planned how it would be used. He had consumed alcohol during the outing, which affected judgment and coordination. The vessel was anchored above deep Atlantic waters, where large predatory sharks, including tiger sharks, are documented throughout the region. The swim platform at the stern sat just above the waterline, a common recreational space where passengers often sit with their feet in the sea. A posted advisory at the marina warned against attracting wildlife near swimmers or anchored vessels, particularly through the use of bait or fish waste. Tiger sharks are highly opportunistic feeders and are known to investigate sudden food signals quickly, especially in offshore waters where fish waste spreads through the current. Even small amounts of blood, oil, or discarded bait can draw predatory fish closer to anchored boats than people realize. Celeste was sitting on the back platform in the afternoon with her feet in the water, reading. She had already gone in and out of the water earlier in the trip. Tomek picked up the bucket of fish scraps, carried it to the side, and dumped it straight into the water next to her. The water around the stern turned cloudy with fish bits, oil, and blood as it spread quickly with the current. She immediately shouted at him, but by then it was already in the water and spreading out. In that moment, what was just a careless pour was already turning the water beside her into something entirely different. Within seconds, movement intensified beside the platform. A large shark rose quickly from below and struck toward the disturbance near the stern. There was a sudden burst of water and chaos at the surface as Celeste lost her footing and went into the water. Tomek moved toward the stern, but did not enter the water. He attempted to throw flotation equipment, which fell short of the target area. There was continued turbulence in the water near the stern, with brief, unclear movement at the surface. Celeste briefly resurfaced before disappearing again beneath the disturbance. A distress call was transmitted from the vessel requesting emergency assistance. A maritime rescue unit launched from a nearby station and proceeded to the reported coordinates, but visibility and surface conditions had already deteriorated. A search operation was initiated, including diver deployment, but no significant remains were recovered despite extended efforts. State wildlife officials and county police looked into what happened and said it took place in an area known for sharks, and that the fish waste dumped into the water near where she was swimming likely played a role. No one was charged, though they did review whether anyone was negligent. In the end, they said it was unsafe behavior, but not enough to bring criminal charges. One item of personal footwear was later recovered, drifting several hundred feet from the anchor point. No significant remains were found despite extended search efforts. The case was officially closed after several weeks. Even with boats circling the exact coordinates, the water had already erased anything clear enough to follow. A regional newspaper published a brief account of the incident, noting the loss of a woman at sea following a shark encounter. Major outlets did not pursue follow-up coverage, and the story remained confined to local reporting. Years later, the incident was still referenced locally as a reminder of how quickly routine decisions on open water could escalate beyond recovery without warning signals. September 15th, 2018. The afternoon at Newcomb Hollow Beach in Wellfleet, Massachusetts came in warm with a light breeze and small rolling surf. The water looked calm and shallow at the edges. No lifeguards were on duty that day. Arthur Medici was 26 years old and had come to spend the afternoon boogie boarding. And nothing about that afternoon suggested anything unusual in the water just beyond the breakers. Arthur had moved to the United States from Brazil to attend college and built a steady life in Revere, Massachusetts, working part-time as a waiter. He was athletic, loved being outdoors, and was deeply involved in a Brazilian Christian church in the nearby town of Saugus. People who knew him described him as full of energy and easy to be around. There's something about stories like this that always feels too ordinary at first. Nothing in the setup ever matches what comes next. At the time of his death, Arthur was engaged, and he and his girlfriend had already had custom wedding bands made for the ceremony they were planning. That afternoon, he was at Newcomb Hollow with Isaac Rocha, a 20-year-old from Everett. They were boogie boarding together in the small surf, a regular afternoon at a beach they had visited before. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing looked out of place. Here is something worth thinking about. The outer Cape Cod coastline holds one of the largest gray seal populations on the entire East Coast. Seals gather in nearshore zones in large numbers, and great white sharks move into the same coastal areas to follow that food source. By 2018, both the seal population and documented shark activity along the outer Cape had increased significantly from earlier decades. Great white sharks are the largest predatory fish on Earth, with adults in this region commonly reaching 12 to 16 feet and weighing well over 2,000 pounds. They are ambush hunters that approach from below rather than at the surface. Attacks typically involve a single fast strike. In late summer and early fall, when water temperatures are still warm and seal populations are concentrated along the coast, great whites move into nearshore zones much closer to the beach than most people assume. Arthur and Isaac were roughly 30 yards from the sand when it happened. There was a sudden violent disturbance in the water near where the two were boarding. The shark struck Arthur from below, biting into his upper leg with devastating force. Isaac was right beside him. He moved toward Arthur immediately and pulled him back through the water toward the shore. What gets me is that the shark did not arrive because Arthur got in the water. It was already there. The two of them were just moving through the same space without either one knowing it. On the beach, bystanders moved quickly. Towels were pressed around Arthur's leg as blood stopper. A former lifeguard who happened to be there helped direct the effort. People carried Arthur across the sand to reach waiting paramedics. He was airlifted to a hospital on Cape Cod. Everything that could go right on that beach did go right. Someone knew first aid. People moved fast. The response was real, and it still was not enough. But by the time he reached it, he was already dead. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as severe blood loss from shark bites. He was engaged. He had a community around him. He had someone right beside him who did everything possible. The outcome was still the same. 30 yards from the sand on a quiet September afternoon.
It was May 11th, 2018, nautical miles off the coast of Nassau, Bahamas. Milo had built a career on being the calmest person in situations everyone else feared. That persona would only hold for 6 full minutes of treading water before the fourth pass. Milo Renner, 24, was based in Tempe, Arizona, and ran a small YouTube channel focused on challenging common beliefs about dangerous animals and outdoor survival. Though not a biologist, he had built an online persona around projecting confidence in risky situations. The Bahamas trip was intended as a multi-part video series. Milo chartered a private offshore vessel and told viewers he planned to enter open water near oceanic white-tipped sharks to demonstrate his belief that calm, non-bleeding swimmers were unlikely to be targeted by the animals. What Milo had was partial information used in service of a conclusion he had already reached. Oceanic whitetips are a pelagic species, meaning they live in open ocean, far from the reef systems most recreational divers encounter. They are not the largest sharks, typically reaching 6 to 8 feet and roughly 150 to 375 pounds. The species has been implicated in more open ocean fatalities than its size would suggest, largely because encounters happen far from shore, far from help, and often involve people who are already compromised. The crew consisted of a father and his 19-year-old son, operators of a Nassau charter business with decades of offshore experience. The son later told maritime authorities that his father had repeatedly warned Milo about the deep water and the presence of oceanic white-tip sharks in the area before he entered the water. At one point, the son even tried to stop him from going overboard, but Milo brushed aside the warning and entered the water with a waterproof camera rig. The recovered footage runs for 11 minutes and 22 seconds. The camera became separated from Milo during the incident, but the floating housing was later recovered and the memory card remained readable. For the first 6 minutes, Milo treads water, gesturing outward at the open ocean. He exaggerates his leg kicks multiple times, a move consistent with his stated belief that vibration and visual disruption test whether sharks will approach. A dorsal fin becomes visible in frame at the 6-minute mark, at a distance of approximately 40 yards. Milo sees it, but he does not leave water. Instead, he keeps performing. The shark makes 4 passes. This is not unusual for the species oceanic whitetips, characteristically circle and close distance incrementally. The passes narrow with each circuit. By the 3rd pass, the fin is within 15 yards. The crew can be heard yelling from the boat. Milo's narration becomes shorter between sentences. On the 4th pass, the shark submerges approximately 20 feet out. What happens next takes less than 4 seconds. The camera captures a sudden disturbance and a brief flash of pale underside beneath the surface before the frame becomes completely obscured by white water. The audio contains 2 distinct sounds, a dull, dense impact, and then Milo's voice, not screaming, just stopping. The recording ends there. The son, who was watching from the stern, later described seeing the water go red across a wide radius before surface disturbances continued for an interval he estimated between 90 seconds and 2 minutes. Then nothing. A distress call was placed immediately. Search vessels arrived within 40 minutes. The recovered items were a floating camera housing and a foam flotation collar. Nothing else. Witness accounts and recovered footage were consistent with a shark attack event. No remains were recovered. In the aftermath, the father sold the boat for roughly 1/3 of its value the following October. 40 years of a family business gone. His son stopped going offshore entirely. They were doing their jobs. They told him not to go in. None of that mattered in the end. And I think this is the part of the story that deserves to sit with me. Not the shark, not the video, but 2 people who watched it happen and had to carry it home.
It was November 28, 2018, along a remote stretch of the southern Australian coastline, where steep coastal cliffs dropped into cold, surge-heavy water, and isolated inlets sat largely untouched by recreational divers. The fishermen who worked. The area had learned its rhythms over decades, which inlets held fish, which currents ran cold in late November, and which stretches of water you did not enter alone during seal season. Luca Serrano had been in the area for 3 days before he found the inlet. He had spoken to at least 2 of those fishermen. They had told him clearly what the water was like there and why. Luca Serrano, 34, was a freelance underwater photographer with a growing reputation for finding dive locations that other professionals avoided. He was talented, technically skilled, and increasingly convinced that footage from untouched locations was worth the additional risk. He had developed a pattern of dismissing local warnings when he believed the footage would justify it, treating the caution of people who knew the area as a failure of imagination rather than accumulated knowledge. Great white sharks sit near the top of the marine food chain. Adults in southern Australian waters commonly reach 15 to 20 feet in length and can weigh over 4,400 pounds. They are highly attuned to the presence of marine mammals. Seals represent a primary prey source, and great whites in seal-heavy areas develop specific hunting behaviors around submerged cliff shelves. They approach from depth using the silhouette of prey against surface light to time their ascent. Surge conditions and poor underwater visibility do not impair a great white's sensory detection. They impair the divers. In those conditions, the predator's advantage is essentially total. Luca entered the water before sunrise, carrying a helmet camera, diving gear, and a personal tracking beacon. Surge conditions were strong, and underwater visibility was reduced by the coastal churn. Friends assumed his extended silence was normal. He often spent full days underwater at remote sites. Concern only developed after his tracking beacon remained stationary offshore for nearly 2 days without contact. Search crews traced the beacon to a submerged cliff shelf beneath the coastal rocks. Divers recovered a damaged fin, sections of shredded wetsuit material lodged in a crevice near the shelf edge, and fragments of camera equipment on the reef below. Investigators concluded Luca had most likely been attacked shortly after entering deeper water near the seal hunting zone. The remoteness significantly delayed the recovery effort, and the full sequence of events could not be reconstructed. From what I've studied, the submerged cliff shelf is exactly where a great white ambush would occur. They use depth and structure to approach from below, timing their ascent against the surface silhouette of whatever is above them. In surge conditions with reduced visibility, a diver near that kind of formation has almost no ability to detect an approach. Once a great white initiates an ambush in that environment, the outcome is determined in seconds. What I keep looking back upon is how preventable this incident could have been. Multiple warning signs, multiple fishermen's concerns, yet he still ignored them. This is not a place for humans to exist, especially when there's an active seal colony in the area. These types of places are not safe. A place where seals exist, and a place where a predator dwells. Even with a creative mind and an adventurous personality, there are some parts that you should not dive into. He wasn't reckless the way Mason was, or impulsive the way Adriana was. He was deliberate. He weighed the risk, considered the footage, and made what he considered an informed decision. But in a remote inlet during seal season, with no dive partner and a great white actively hunting the shelf below, the calculation was simply wrong, and there was nobody there to catch the error. The thing that makes this case particularly difficult is the uncertainty. With most stories in this episode, investigators could reconstruct a timeline. With Luca, they couldn't. The beacon, the wetsuit fragments, the camera pieces, they tell you where it ended, not how it unfolded. His family received fragments of equipment and a report confirming cause of death consistent with a great white attack in a known predator zone. That was all there was to give them. The incident became widely discussed among Australian diving communities as a warning against solo exploration in predator-heavy coastal waters. Local maritime authorities reinforced existing advisories, and the inlet was flagged in regional dive safety communications. Luca's recovered equipment was returned to his family in Italy. A talented photographer, alone in the water, in a location every local voice had told him to avoid. His story closes out this episode the same way it opened, with the reminder that in predator territory, confidence and skill are not substitutes for the one thing that actually keeps you alive: following the rules. It was June 14th, 2018, on a private boat moving through the warm, shallow waters of the Florida Keys. The sky was clear and the sea was calm. Very few other boats were visible nearby. Raymond Valliere had spent 30 years building one of the most respected fishing charter companies in the Florida Keys. He planned to eventually leave the business to his only son, Aspen, but Raymond died from cancer before those arrangements were finalized, and the problems inside the family became obvious almost immediately. Aspen had never shown much interest in the company. He drifted between jobs, wasted money, and lacked the discipline needed to manage a business. His mother, Regina, kept control of the company herself, and with help from her new husband, the business became even more successful. Over time, portions of the estate were legally transferred to Regina and her husband's side of the family. When Aspen learned how much had changed, he confronted Regina. She admitted she no longer trusted him with the company and told him he needed to get his life together before expecting responsibility. Aspen left convinced his father's legacy had been taken from him. Over the next several years, he became increasingly bitter and isolated. Friends later said he constantly blamed Regina for ruining his future. By 2018, he was heavily in debt. Collection notices filled his apartment, lenders threatened legal action, and he spent hours researching inheritance disputes online. He became obsessed with the company again, and started telling people nothing would ever belong to him while his mother was still alive. Eventually, he suggested a reconciliation trip. He bought drinks for Regina during the outing, and tried to make the day appear peaceful. He steered the boat into waters near parts of the Keys, where fishermen often cleaned catches and discarded remains overboard, areas known to attract bull sharks. sharks. During the trip, the conversation turned back to the inheritance and quickly became hostile. Then, Aspen shoved Regina overboard. She struck a metal bracket attached to the side of the boat during the fall, cutting deeply into her side before hitting the water. She surfaced panicked and disoriented. She was not a strong swimmer, and the alcohol made it harder for her to stay afloat. Blood spread through the water around her. I keep thinking about how long she must have waited for him to help her, even after the shove, even after realizing what he had done. Several minutes later, a bull shark appeared nearby. Bull sharks are common in shallow coastal waters around Florida, but sharks do not instantly attack humans because of small amounts of blood alone. The greater danger was that Regina was already severely injured, exhausted, intoxicated, and stranded in open water without help. Regina screamed and tried to swim back toward the boat. Aspen remained near the railing, watching her struggle. He never threw a flotation device into the water or attempted to pull her aboard. He allowed the boat to drift while she weakened and eventually disappeared beneath the surface. That part stays with me more than anything else. Not the inheritance fight or the planning, just him standing there watching it happen. Aspen returned to shore alone and claimed Regina had accidentally fallen overboard. Her body was never recovered, and the family later held a memorial after search efforts were suspended. Almost immediately afterward, Aspen began legal action against his stepfather regarding ownership of the company and the remaining estate. At first, investigators treated the case as a boating accident, but inconsistencies in Aspen's story slowly began piling up. GPS records showed a long delay before he contacted the Coast Guard. Investigators found internet searches related to inheritance disputes, shark activity in the Keys, and disappearances. Financial records confirmed the seriousness of his debts, and physical evidence near the railing suggested a violent confrontation had occurred. Aspen Valier was arrested several months later and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators later uncovered separate financial manipulation involving Aspen's stepfather, who had altered portions of the inheritance paperwork for his own benefit after Raymond's death. Regina had signed documents without fully understanding how much control was being transferred. Aspen was later convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.
On November 12, 2019, along the southern coast, the sky was gray, and the swell had been building since morning, rolling in hard against the reef line along that stretch of coast. 37-year-old Raymond Cho, known simply as Ray, was gearing up for what was meant to be a short afternoon dive, but he never came back the way he went in. Ray was a commercial abalone diver. He had worked this coastline for years, harvesting abalone from licensed nearshore reef zones under strict operational guidelines. This was not recreational diving. There were surface support boats, timed dive windows, designated zones, and daylight-only regulations built specifically around managing risk. Ray knew all of it, and he followed all of it. The season was in its final stretch. Late spring pushed into early summer, and the commercial quota was nearly complete. That meant operators were working inside, narrowing weather windows to finish remaining dives before seasonal pauses or weather closures forced a stop. There was pressure to get it done. Not panic, just the steady push that anyone working a harvest-driven job understands well. That pressure is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is the reason Ray went into the water that afternoon instead of waiting for a cleaner day. He was not being careless. He was doing his job within the margins. His industry operates in every single season, and those margins on that particular afternoon were not wide enough. By the time Ray hit the water, visibility near the reef was already bad and getting worse. The swell was pushing sand up off the bottom and cutting sight lines down to almost nothing. His support team watched from above. Everything still looked fine from up there. That was the problem. Up there and down there were two completely different worlds that afternoon. Ray moved carefully along the reef, staying close to the rock formations. Nothing unusual, nothing visible, but something was already in that water with him, and the same low visibility that made his job harder that day was making it a great deal easier for something else. Great white sharks do not need clear water to locate a target. They detect pressure changes, electrical fields, and movement through organs that work independently of light and visibility. A large white shark patrolling a coastal reef in turbulent surge conditions, reads the water in ways that have no human equivalent. A diver working close to rock formations in low visibility is practically invisible to the human eye and completely readable to a hunting shark. What happened next was not something the surface crew could have anticipated. The shark moved in along the reef edge. It made contact with Ray's lower leg, one rapid bite only, but that single contact caused catastrophic damage. The bite hit major blood vessels in his lower leg. Ray was incapacitated almost immediately, partly from the injury and partly from the surge near the reef that made it impossible to stay controlled in the water without the full use of both legs. This is the part I keep coming back to when I think about what happened to Ray. He was inside the rules, permitted zone, support team in position, everything by the book, and none of it mattered. The ocean does not recognize safety protocols. Neither do they make exceptions for compliance. The surface team reacted immediately and hauled Ray out of the water using standard commercial dive emergency procedures. They started first aid on the boat right away, trying to stop the bleeding, but it wasn't enough. The damage to the blood vessels was too severe. Ray died from blood loss before he could reach advanced medical care. The incident was officially recorded as an unprovoked shark encounter during commercial abalone diving operations. Contributing factors were noted as reduced underwater visibility, active swell conditions, and proximity to reef structure.
It was January 14th, 2017, in open Atlantic waters, approximately 120 nautical miles northeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. A cruise vessel moved through deep offshore ocean under a moonless sky and calm sea conditions. Denzel Fripp, 52, worked as a regional sales manager for a commercial flooring company in the Midwestern United States, traveling frequently between clients, warehouses, and hotels. He was divorced, lived alone, and had 2 adult children with limited contact. People who worked with him said he often looked tired, drank a lot while traveling for work, and kept to himself for long stretches between jobs. He later booked a solo Caribbean cruise for a short break, only mentioning it to a few people and not really sharing any details about where he was going or what he planned to do. The vessel carried thousands of passengers and operated normal nighttime services, including dining, entertainment, and open deck access. That evening, Denzel moved through onboard bars and lounges before stepping out onto the aft exterior promenade. He was later seen alone near the stern railing, watching the ship's wake stretch into darkness. From the deck, it just looks like someone killing time alone at the rail. A passing couple briefly noticed him near the railing, but did not alert the crew. He went over the stern railing into the open ocean while the ship was still underway and quickly increased distance from the vessel. He resurfaced afterward, though his condition at that point could not be clearly determined, and he had no flotation device or visual reference to the ship. The man overboard alarm was not activated immediately and was only raised several minutes later after confirmation. Once alerted, the vessel initiated emergency procedures and began a wide turning maneuver to return toward the last known position. In the meantime, Denzel remained in open water, drifting in a deep ocean environment with no land nearby and no external reference points beyond fading ship lights. In the minutes that followed, movement was detected in the water around the area of the fall, with brief surface disturbances consistent with an oceanic white-tip shark, a species known to range widely in offshore Atlantic waters. The animal remained in the vicinity briefly before moving out of the immediate area. At that point, heavy blood loss, exhaustion, and not being able to stay above the water made it harder and harder to survive. Several minutes after the man overboard alert was raised, the vessel began turning, and searchlights eventually reached the area. The beam illuminated scattered surface disturbance, but the individual was no longer clearly visible at the surface. From the deck, the light just shows how much open water there is, with nothing holding still inside it. Crew members observed from the deck, but did not provide detailed public descriptions beyond noting severe conditions in the water. A rescue tender launched from the ship and reached the position shortly after the vessel returned, operating in darkness and residual wake. Recovery efforts began immediately. but the victim was already deceased upon retrieval. A shipboard medical officer confirmed death shortly afterward, citing catastrophic blood loss and traumatic injuries consistent with multiple severe limb wounds in open ocean conditions. A formal maritime review listed contributing factors including intoxication, fall from vessel, and delayed detection due to distance. Marine predator involvement, consistent with an oceanic white-tip shark, was noted in post-incident analysis, but was not emphasized in public reporting. The behavior was interpreted as an opportunistic investigation of a drifting casualty in offshore waters, rather than a prolonged predatory sequence. A regional Coast Guard report released weeks later added further detail on timing and offshore conditions, but saw limited media circulation. A short obituary appeared in his hometown newspaper noting his death during travel, without reference to circumstances at sea. The cruise line attributed the death to an accidental overboard fall. No mention of marine animal involvement was included in public statements, and the case remained primarily within maritime safety records. In open water like this, once someone is separated from the vessel, even a few minutes of delay can turn recovery into a search with no clear starting point.
It was March 4, 2017. Along a drainage canal running the eastern perimeter of Nadi International Airport in Viti Levu, Fiji, a routine evening swim in brackish runoff water ended in a fatal shark attack in a confined urban waterway. Emosi Ratu Dakua was 23 years old, from a nearby informal settlement on the outskirts of Nadi. He worked irregular jobs, most recently as a groundskeeper at a local guest house, and spent much of his time around coastal waterways. He was a strong swimmer and familiar with the drainage canal, which local residents sometimes use despite its connection to airport runoff and tidal flow from the nearby bay. The canal was a narrow tidal channel between the airport perimeter and Nadi Bay, carrying mixed freshwater and saltwater that became brackish at high tide, with heavy sediment runoff reducing visibility to inches. Bull sharks are known to enter such systems in Fiji, following tidal currents into confined waterways, where movement is restricted and escape routes are limited. That evening, Emosi entered the canal with two friends and waded into chest-deep opaque water as the incoming tide pushed steadily upstream. His friends remained on the embankment while he drifted a few meters out in the slow current, the surface appearing calm with only faint ripples and fading light reflections.
I can't stress enough how little you can actually see in water like that. It's just guesswork and movement.
As he moved farther from the bank, there was no visible disturbance in the water column. No fin, no splash, no warning movement. The confined channel and steady tidal push masked any change beneath the surface. The bull shark came up from below and hit his right forearm in one sudden, explosive bite, severing the radius and ulna mid-shaft and taking the hand and lower forearm instantly. The force lifted him forward slightly, and blood spread quickly into the confined water, darkening the area within seconds. Emosi reacted immediately and instinctively, trying to turn back toward the embankment while calling out to his friends. The shark returned almost immediately. The second bite struck his right thigh just above midline, crushing muscle and tearing deep through soft tissue while severing the surface of the femur. The shark executed a short lateral shake, widening the wound and destabilizing his lower body in the shallow current before releasing. Emosi remained upright only briefly, then staggered in the water with severe blood loss from both injuries.
He's just struggling to keep balance in water that's too shallow to even move properly in.
His friends were directly above him on the concrete edge of the canal, shouting his name. The canal wall, however, rose too high from the waterline for him to climb unaided. Emosi reached upward with his remaining hand, managing to grip the concrete lip. One friend grabbed his wrist while the other pulled at his shirt, and together they hauled him upward onto the embankment. He collapsed onto the concrete walkway, still conscious but rapidly deteriorating. Blood loss from the forearm stump was pulsing in arterial bursts, while the thigh wound continued, a heavy, continuous bleed. His breathing was shallow and erratic, and he was unable to speak coherently. A passing vehicle stopped shortly after, and a nurse who had just finished a shift came over to help. He quickly assessed the injuries and improvised a tourniquet above the forearm using materials from the vehicle, while also keeping direct pressure on the thigh wound. Emergency services were called, and pressure was maintained until responders arrived. I just see him step in immediately and start using whatever's in the car to slow the bleeding down. Emozi was transported to hospital in Nadi and survived the initial transfer, but arrived in critical condition due to massive blood loss and multi-site trauma. Surgical teams performed emergency intervention, but the extent of tissue destruction required a higher level amputation of the right arm and extensive debridement of the right thigh, with significant vascular and muscular damage limiting reconstruction. Despite treatment, he died later that night from hemorrhagic shock and systemic collapse following catastrophic blood loss. Medical assessment documented traumatic amputation of the right forearm at midshaft with complete distal loss, and severe crush and laceration trauma to the right thigh with partial cortical damage to the femur. Cause of death was recorded as exsanguination, secondary to severe extremity trauma in a confined tidal canal, complicated by delayed definitive surgical control. Local reports described the incident briefly in connection with post-storm safety concerns in urban waterways near Nadi. No structural changes or warning signage were added, and the canal continued to be used informally despite known tidal shark movement risk.
December 2nd, 2013, Maui, Hawaii. Gray clouds covered the sky, and the water off Makina State Recreation Area was unusually calm, almost like glass. That morning, 57-year-old Patrick Briney pointed his kayak toward Molokini Island, unaware that something was already in the water with him. Patrick had recently retired from a career as a commercial airline pilot. He lived in Stevenson, Washington. More than 3 decades of flying commercial aircraft had changed him into a person with a very specific mindset. Airline pilots do not get to be careless. The job demands discipline, constant environmental awareness, and the ability to make good decisions under pressure without losing composure. Patrick had done all of that, day after day, for over 30 years without incident. When retirement came, he had to find something that still demanded real focus. Something with enough weight to it that getting it right actually meant something. Offshore kayak fishing became that thing. It was solitary, physically demanding, and required him to read the water and manage conditions the way he had always read instruments from a cockpit. He had come to Maui on vacation and brought a Fishin' G partner along, though they paddled separately in their own kayaks. The plan that morning was straightforward. Head towards Molokini, work artificial lures, attract bait fish, and fish. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would have alarmed anyone watching from shore. That is what I keep thinking about with this case. Patrick was not reckless or inexperienced. He was a retired professional on a fishing trip, and what happened to him came down to a single physical habit that he had almost certainly used before without consequence. Habits like that are dangerous precisely because they work. They do not feel like risks because they never have been. While fighting a hooked fish and managing the tension on his rod, Patrick allowed his right foot to slip over the side of the kayak and into the water. Kayak fishermen do this for balance while reeling, particularly when fighting a strong fish. Tiger sharks are one of the most persistently dangerous shark species in any ocean on Earth. Their behavioral difference from other large species is significant. Where a great white tends to bite once and withdraw, tiger sharks are known to return to and continue an attack. They are classified as opportunistic feeders, meaning they investigate and pursue almost any irregular movement or shape in the water. A foot dangling below the hull of a kayak, exposed and separated from the larger profile of the boat, registers as exactly the kind of isolated target that draws a tiger shark in. The shark bit Patrick's right foot and lower leg with enough force to flip the kayak entirely. He was thrown into open water. What had been a quiet morning on the water became a survival situation in a single second, and there was nothing Patrick or anyone else could have done in that moment to change what had already happened. His fishing partner reached him quickly. He tied a blood stopper to Patrick's leg, using materials on hand, and then paddled to a nearby charter tour vessel to get help. The boat moved Patrick to shore as fast as it could. Paramedics were on the ground when he arrived and transported him to a medical facility without delay. Patrick Briney died shortly after arrival. The cause of death was blood loss from a severed popliteal artery. State officials responded by closing beaches 1 mile north and 1 mile south of Makina State Recreation Area. The response from his partner was fast. The medical response was fast. The popliteal artery did not wait. Patrick had spent decades in an industry designed around preventing the worst outcomes through procedure and awareness. 1 foot in the wrong water ended 30 years of that discipline in seconds. The ocean does not measure experience. It only measures what is physically inside it right now.
It was January 18, 2016, off the rocky shoreline of Gansbai, South Africa, where a woman who had built her identity around a dangerous misunderstanding waded chest deep into water that had already been flagged as unsafe that morning. Maris Badenhorst, 43, weighed 326 pounds and ran a small Facebook group about astrology and sharks. She had no formal science education. Her expertise in marine behavior came from interpreting Mercury retrograde shadows and her self-proclaimed past life as a Polynesian shark deity. The premise was simple and wrong, that great white sharks, when approached calmly and without aggression, would respond in kind. She posted videos, infographics, and personal testimonials. 5 members had flown to South Africa specifically to witness what she had been promising them for months: a close, peaceful encounter with a great white in open water. The waters off Gansbai are one of the highest density great white habitats on Earth. Adults in this region average 11 to 14 feet in length and can exceed 2,500 pounds. Great whites are not ambush predators by default. They investigate, they circle, they test.
That behavior is not curiosity in any meaningful sense. It is a threat assessment.
Local surfers had reported a large great white shark in the shallows that morning, likely attracted by increased fish activity near shore. One participant later told investigators she had asked Maris whether they should wait, but Maris replied that the shark's slow lateral passes were non-threatening behavior. The group entered waist-deep water, with Maris leading toward the area where the shark had last surfaced. The shark made 2 wide passes around them before closing the distance. When it came within about 8 feet, Maris turned toward the others, said something indistinct on the footage, and then faced the shark. She moved toward it through the chest-deep water and extended both arms. Her hands made contact with the shark's rostrum, the blunt cartilaginous tip of its snout, for approximately 1 second, but it was already a catastrophic mistake. The shark snapped laterally with the full torque of its head and neck and closed its jaws around her right forearm and elbow region. The shark shook its head twice in rapid succession. Most of the forearm was effectively removed, with extensive destruction extending proximally into the upper arm. The bite and tearing motion severed the brachial artery above the elbow, causing immediate massive arterial hemorrhage. Blood dispersed through the surf within seconds, a visible dark cloud that expanded faster than most witnesses expected. The shark released. It did not return. Maris was still upright, her right arm held slightly away from her body. She then collapsed forward into the breaking surf, her face entering the water as blood loss rapidly impaired consciousness. Her followers caught her and pulled her partially upright before she went under completely. Several were still holding their phones. 2 continued filming while 2 others tried to pull her through the break. But at 356 pounds, she was too heavy to move quickly. They struggled to lift her, her body dragging against the sand, the surf pulling at her legs. The delay cost precious minutes. A surfer on the beach called emergency services. Lifeguards reached her within about 4 minutes, but she was unresponsive by the time paramedics loaded her, roughly 9 minutes after the bite. She died from severe blood loss and drowning before reaching the clinic. The coroner reported near complete loss of her right forearm, a fractured radius, complete transection of the brachial artery above the elbow, and fatal exsanguination. The Facebook group was dissolved shortly after. Authorities seized and kept the footage. What stays with me isn't the shark.
It's that she spent years convinced that biology bends for her belief. But in the end, biology was simple: 326 pounds on wet sand, and no one could lift her in time.
It was August 11th, 2013, off the Outer Banks of North Carolina, where warm Gulf Stream water pushed close to the coastline, and a small fishing boat sat, anchored well offshore, under a dark sky. Group had been out for hours, and the night had taken on the loose, reckless energy that comes from too much alcohol and too little judgment. The kind of night where every bad idea sounds manageable. Mason Rourke and Devin Cross were both 19, college freshmen spending the summer along the North Carolina coast before the school year began. Mason had built a small online following through stunt videos and was constantly chasing the next piece of footage. Devin followed along more out of social pressure than genuine enthusiasm, not willing to be the one who said no. Neither had meaningful experience with large pelagic fish or open water sharks. Short-fin mako sharks are the fastest shark species in the world, capable of bursts exceeding 45 miles per hour. Adults commonly reach 10 to 12 feet in length and can exceed 500 to 1,000 pounds at full size. They are highly reactive when stressed, with powerful, unpredictable bursting movements, and jaws lined with long, narrow teeth designed for gripping fast-moving prey. A mako on a line for an extended period is not exhausted. It is stressed, oxygen-deprived, and primed for explosive reactive aggression. The rolling, sluggish behavior a boatside mako sometimes displays is a stress response, not submission. Experienced offshore fishermen treat a boatside mako as one of the most dangerous situations in recreational fishing. The group hooked a large mako estimated at 8 feet. Several nearby fishermen warned them to cut the line immediately. Mason insisted on dragging the shark alongside the swim platform for photographs and video. After nearly an hour on the line, the mako had gone into a slow roll beside the boat, appearing subdued. The group interpreted the stillness as safety. Mason and Devin grabbed its tail and dorsal fin for photos. Devin climbed lower onto the platform to hold the shark closer for a video. Without warning, the mako burst into violent thrashing, twisting upward toward the platform. Its jaws caught Devin across the shoulder and lower neck as he leaned over, chaotic, uncontrolled contact in the space of a second. Massive arterial bleeding began almost immediately. The group used towels and clothing to apply pressure while pushing toward shore at full speed, but they were too far offshore for emergency medical help to arrive in time. Devin died before the vessel reached the marina. Investigators attributed the fatal encounter to alcohol, reckless wildlife handling, and a complete absence of experience with the species involved. From everything I've studied about mako behavior, the hour on the line didn't make that shark safer. It made it more dangerous. That slow roll wasn't calm. It was a stressed animal running low on oxygen, and the moment Devin got low on that platform, he was within striking range of something that can move faster than almost anything else in the ocean. What I find hard to get past is that the nearby fishermen warned them clearly and specifically. Cut the line, immediately. That's experienced people telling two teenagers exactly what to do. Mason heard it and decided his footage was worth more than the warning. Devin paid for that with his life, and I think about that part a lot. There's a dynamic in cases like this, worth naming directly. Devin wasn't driving the situation. He was following someone else's lead, the way people do when they don't want to break the group's momentum. That reluctance to say out loud that something is a bad idea shows up constantly in these cases. It's just the ordinary human instinct to go along, and in the wrong environment, that instinct can be the last decision someone makes. The incident received local coverage and was later referenced in regional fishing safety advisories as a case study in the dangers of handling large pelagic sharks at boatside. Mason was treated for minor lacerations. Devin's family held a private funeral in his hometown.
It was September 14, 2021. Along a flooded stretch of shoreline in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, post-hurricane waters had overtaken low marshland, turning familiar ground into unstable, shallow channels.
I'm not gonna dress this up. This is the kind of place where you can't tell what you're actually standing in anymore.
Terrell Boudreau was 51 years old, a retired maintenance worker from Belchasset who had spent more than 2 decades doing mechanical and pipework at a chemical facility along the river. Recently retired due to a knee injury, he lived alone near the shoreline and spent most of his time fishing, repairing storm damage, and checking on property left vulnerable after Hurricane Ida.
This is what life looks like down there after a storm. People just managing what's left in front of them.
In the weeks after the storm, the lower delta remained heavily altered. Floodwater mixed with river overflow and marsh runoff, creating opaque, sediment-heavy conditions with almost no underwater visibility. Displaced fish and organic debris gathered along the shoreline, drawing increased predator activity into unusually shallow water where movement could not be seen until it was already close. Terrell and a neighbor walked down to inspect a small dock he had built years earlier. The structure had partially survived the surge, though sections had shifted off their supports. The water at the shoreline was thigh-deep, warm, and completely clouded by sediment. His neighbor briefly returned toward the truck to retrieve a tool, leaving Terrell alone at the water's edge. As he stood near one of the dock posts, there was a sudden disturbance in the water around his left leg, followed by a single, forceful bite from a large estuarine-adapted bull shark. The bite caused catastrophic injury to the left calf and lower leg, and he was immediately driven off balance into the soft, sediment-heavy bottom. He fell forward into the mud, unable to regain stable footing as the water around him became clouded with disturbed sediment. The shark released shortly after the initial bite and did not maintain contact. Terrell struggled to rise, but had no stable footing. His hands sank into mud with each attempt, and his face went under repeatedly as he tried to push himself upright. The soft bottom kept giving way under him, turning every movement into slow resistance against the flooded ground. The shark did not return. He lost consciousness within moments and did not regain it, as blood loss and shock progressed rapidly in the flooded conditions.
And I mean, when I pictured from my side, it's just that helpless kind of struggle. Nothing solid to push off, just mud giving way every time.
His neighbor returned shortly after hearing commotion from the shoreline and found him in the shallow water. He attempted to move him toward firmer ground, but quickly realized the injuries were catastrophic. Emergency services were called immediately, but he was pronounced dead before advanced care could be provided. Medical assessment documented severe traumatic injury to the left lower extremity, consistent with a single shark bite in shallow floodwater conditions, with hemorrhagic shock identified as the cause of death. The pattern of tissue damage and rapid blood loss was consistent with a high-force bite to a weight-bearing limb, with immediate loss of structural function and inability to maintain stability in submerged, sediment-heavy terrain. Post-incident reporting noted that hurricane-driven flooding had displaced coastal and estuarine shark species into unusually shallow inland waters, where extreme turbidity and restricted movement space increased the risk of rare close-contact encounters. Investigators also highlighted that the combination of reduced visibility, debris-laden water, and altered prey distribution in post-storm conditions likely contributed to brief, accidental proximity events rather than sustained predatory behavior.
It was October 18th, 2016, off Guadalupe Island in Baja California, Mexico, 150 miles offshore in clear, deep blue water, with visibility extending far below the surface. A surface shark cage floated beside a live-aboard vessel, while a large great white circled below in slow, controlled passes. Maren Wolf, 34, was a dental hygienist in Tucson, Arizona. She'd spent about 2 years saving for a shark cage diving trip after getting into documentaries and dive footage. At work, she was seen as quiet and steady, the kind of person who focused fully once she committed to something. She'd only recently gotten her basic diving certification and had no real open water experience beyond training dives. This was her second day on a 3-day trip, and she had already been in the cage a few times without any issues. People often build confidence quickly in environments that feel controlled, even when they're still very far from familiar. Guadalupe Island is known for seasonal great white shark activity and frequent close passes near cage diving operations. The cage was a steel frame lowered beside the vessel with an emergency side hatch intended for crew use only. Passengers were strictly instructed not to touch the hatch, which was secured by a manual release system designed for rapid opening. During the dive, a large female great white shark, identified by distinguishing dorsal fin markings, circled the cage for an extended period. She passed close along the front and sidebars in repeated arcs, sometimes slowing before turning away again into deeper water. Maren was positioned along one side of the cage, watching the shark as it moved past. At one point, she extended her hand through the bars toward it, reaching into the water outside the structure despite prior instructions given during briefing. Her hand crossed the bars just as the shark turned back in. At the same time, the emergency hatch mechanism was triggered and the side panel swung open outward from the frame. Inside the cage, another diver noticed the sudden movement and shifted position, but the change happened too quickly to intervene. The shark, which had been circling just beyond the cage, turned sharply and returned toward the structure from a wider angle rather than the front approach most divers were watching. It turned back toward the cage opening and made contact at the edge of the structure, triggering a sudden burst of movement and splashing at the surface. The cage frame shifted under the force of the impact as she lost her footing amid the turbulence. From outside, it would have just looked like sudden chaos at the surface. From inside the cage and the deck above, visibility was briefly obscured by churning water and the shark's movement against the structure. She went under and was not immediately visible again. Crew members immediately signaled for assistance and began emergency response procedures. A safety diver entered shortly after and conducted a search around the cage and down to depth, where scattered gear and a damaged weight belt were later found. Despite extended searching by support crews, no confirmed trace of her was recovered in the immediate area. A safety diver entered shortly after and conducted a search around the cage and down to approximately 70 feet, where scattered gear and a damaged weight belt were later located on the seafloor. There was no sign of the person in the immediate area. Boats and support crews continued searching for several hours, expanding the search pattern outward, but no additional identifiable evidence was recovered. Authorities later classified the incident as a fatal shark encounter during a commercial diving operation with no recovered remains. Investigators reviewed procedures and confirmed the hatch had been accessed in violation of safety instructions, but the operator was cleared of negligence due to signed waivers and documented briefings. Following the incident, cage diving safety systems were reviewed across the industry, including changes to emergency access designs and increased reliance on top-controlled entry systems in some operations. The updates were described as routine safety improvements without public reference to the specific case. Marin's family was later informed that recovery efforts were exhausted. The expedition resumed after an extended suspension period and regulatory review, and the site later continued operating under revised safety protocols. The event remained recorded in maritime logs as a fatal offshore diving incident involving a large predatory shark, with remains never recovered. Looking back, what stands out is how fast layered controls can collapse at once. Not just one mistake, but timing, environment, and human behavior aligning in a way that leaves almost no room for recovery.
Ray was a professional. He had training, support, protocols, and years of experience behind him. None of it was enough. The next person had none of that. She was 17 years old, standing in waist-deep water on a summer outing, and the only thing that put her in danger was one backward step at the wrong moment. June 28, 2021, Tampa Bay, Florida. The morning was already warm, the air thick and still, holding that heavy coastal heat even before 9 a.m. 17-year-old Madison Chan had no idea that the most routine summer outing of her life was about to become something she would spend years trying to recover from. Maddie was a high school senior from Tampa. She had grown up adjacent to the ocean, spent summers wading through coastal shallows, and carried that particular brand of confidence that comes purely from familiarity. She was never the one who needed convincing to get in the water. The outing was organized through a local youth group, 8 teenagers, 2 supervising adults, and a shallow sandbar beside a tidal channel in the intracoastal waterway. Locals visited the area during low tide, but the deeper water nearby carried a steady flow of fish moving between the bay and surrounding estuaries. From outside, everything looked normal. Waist-deep water, white sand, and an open sky. But what it looked like and what it actually was were 2 entirely different things. That stretch of the intracoastal connects to nearby tidal estuaries, so it's a common route for fish moving between salt and brackish water. Before they went in, a supervising adult gave a quick warning. Don't splash too much and stay away from deeper channels. Most of the teenagers listened, most of them at least. Looking at it now, it's easy to see how ordinary it all seemed at the start. Nothing about that morning would have raised alarm for most people. But that's often how these situations are remembered later. The first hour passed without incident. Then a splash fight started. 8 teenagers in shallow water. I doubt anyone in that group thought twice about it. But 8 people splashing around in a tidal channel quickly turned the calm water into foam and stir up sand, making it cloudy and messy underneath. Maddie stepped backward mid-splash. misjudged the edge of the sandbar and stepped into slightly deeper water where her footing became unstable and she briefly lost balance. Bull sharks are known for their aggressive territorial behavior and are responsible for more unprovoked attacks in shallow coastal waters than most other shark species. What separates them from most other species is not size but habitat range. They are uniquely capable of surviving in both saltwater and freshwater, making shallow coastal waterways, river mouths, and intracoastal corridors their primary hunting ground, rather than an exception. They are territorial, stimulus-driven, and require no depth to be lethal. The shark was moving along the channel edge where small fish gathered. It was a mature bull shark about 8 feet long, staying near the boundary between shallow and deeper water. The water was already cloudy from the activity. When Maddie began thrashing in the deeper channel, the shark turned toward the disturbance. The bite was fast. It clamped onto her lower left leg for a moment, then released and moved away. In most cases like this, sharks don't continue once they realize it isn't prey. They break off and leave, and that is usually the end of the interaction. But the damage had already been done. The bite tore deeply into the lower leg and severed a major artery. Blood loss was immediate and severe, spreading quickly through the water around her. Her friends pulled her onto the sandbar within seconds and tried to control the bleeding. They pressed hard on the wound and used whatever they had to slow it down. But the injury was far beyond what makeshift help could handle. In situations like this, time is the only thing that matters, and they simply didn't have enough of it. By the time emergency responders reached them, she had already lost consciousness. She died from blood loss before she could be airlifted out. Looking at it afterwards, nothing about that moment felt like what people imagine danger to look like. There was no warning, no buildup, no sense that anything had changed until it already had. It was just a normal stretch of water, and then suddenly it wasn't.
It was May 13th, 2026. Candias Beach along the southern stretch of the Pernambuco coastline came in warm and overcast, with moderate surf and a flat cloud cover sitting low over the water. From the shore, it looked like any other Tuesday, but something in the surf line made that assumption start to break. Families were spread along the sand, vendors moving through the crowd, the usual morning rhythm of a busy public beach. Gabriel Santos walked into the surf with his 2 kids while his wife stood close behind in the shallows. Gabriel was 42 and worked as a civil engineer. A few months earlier, he had moved his family from São Paulo to Recife for a port project along the coast. Life near the ocean was still new for them. His wife Juliana, 39, was a schoolteacher on leave. She was still getting used to the slower rhythm of a beach town. Their son Lucas, 16, loved the water and swam with confidence that sometimes made him go a little farther than he should, while their daughter Sophia, who was only 14 years old, was the opposite of her brother. She stayed close to adults and never liked going deep. She liked feeling safe where she could still stand. That morning, they came to Candias Beach just to spend time together. Nothing special, just a family day in the water. What they didn't see was what had changed beneath the surface. After heavy rain, a canal nearby had pushed a large flow of dark water into the sea. It spread quietly along the shallow surf. From above, the ocean still looked normal, but underwater, everything was different. The water was cloudy, full of movement. Small fish gathered there, and something larger was already moving through them. Gabriel's family stepped into the same water without knowing any of that. I keep thinking about how many small things had to line up for that morning to end up the way it did. The rain the night before, the canal pushing out that heavy flow into the sea, the way it spread along the shore without anyone really noticing, even the exact spot Lucas chose to swim in. Every piece was already in place before the family even got there. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous sharks found in shallow coastal water anywhere in the world. Adults reach 7 to 11 feet and can weigh well over 500 pounds. They hunt effectively in murky, turbulent surf and are not slowed by noise, boat movement or human presence in the water. They are built for exactly this kind of environment: low visibility, shallow depth, high surface activity. Lucas swam slightly ahead of Gabriel and Sophia, moving into the deeper, darker water near the edge of the plume. When Gabriel noticed that Lucas was getting a little too far ahead, he called out for him to come back closer. When Lucas didn't respond, Gabriel started moving toward him, intending to bring him back himself, but by then, it was already too late. The bull shark came from below in a single fast motion and drove its jaws into Lucas's upper thigh and hip, cutting through muscle and severing major blood vessels in one strike. Lucas went limp almost immediately. The shark broke off and moved back into the murky water. Blood spread fast through the surf in every direction. Gabriel reached his son within seconds and got beneath him, trying to pull him toward shore. The water around them was already heavy with blood, and the visibility below the surface was zero. A second bull shark moved through the area, drawn by the intense movement and disturbance in the surf. It struck Gabriel in the lower side, a single deep bite that tore through muscle before the animal broke off again. Gabriel stayed above the surface, but was now seriously injured, still trying to hold Lucas up against the pull of the waves. Gabriel was bleeding, hurt, and still trying to get his son to shore. That was the only thing in his head. Juliana pushed into the water when she saw both of them struggling and reached them through the surf. The shark did not approach again. Together, they managed to bring Lucas closer to shore before lifeguards arrived and took over. Sophia had been in the shallows the entire time. The screaming, the blood spreading through the water, people running in every direction. The panic was enough to make her lose her footing. She went under and could not get back up. With the water churning around her and attention focused on the attacks unfolding farther out, no one realized she was in trouble. By the time she was found, there was nothing anyone could do. What makes Sophia's death especially difficult to process is that she was never directly involved in the attacks. While the chaos unfolded around her, panic and confusion turned an already devastating situation into an even greater tragedy. But for Sophia's family, the disaster was defined by something else entirely: the loss of a 14-year-old girl who had simply been in the wrong place when everything started to fall apart. Lucas died from severe arterial blood loss. Gabriel survived after suffering deep injuries to his leg and undergoing emergency surgery. Juliana was pulled from the water physically unharmed, but was treated for acute shock at the scene. The beach was closed, and warning signage around canal discharge zones along the coastline was reinforced. 4 people, 1 family. One Tuesday morning on a public beach. I have gone through every case in this video more than once, and this is the one I find hardest to put down. Not because of the sharks, but because in the space of a few minutes, an ordinary family outing turned into a tragedy that would leave 2 people dead and change the lives of the survivors forever.
It was May 21st, 2013, somewhere in the central Indian Ocean, roughly 340 miles from the nearest shipping lane. 3 men sat on an orange life raft under the sun, and one of them had spent the last 40 minutes watching something move just beneath the surface, deciding he was going to do something about it. Joren John Heinbinder was 33 and had worked cargo vessels since age 19. He had sailed out of Mombasa, Colombo, and Jakarta, rotating between bulk freighters and container ships, building a career defined by reliability over ambition.
His goal was simple: 2 contracts away from enough saving to open a small equipment rental business in rural Georgia.
His family knew the plan. The mid-sized dry bulk carrier suffered catastrophic hull damage during an unseasonal storm system that moved faster than forecast. The ship listed heavily within 90 minutes and was abandoned. Joran and 2 crewmates, Filipino engineer Dante and Yemeni deckhand Samir, reached a secondary raft. They had 2 days of rations, limited fresh water, a handheld radio that stopped transmitting within 3 hours, and an emergency position indicating beacon that remained unactivated under the assumption the ship's distress systems were still working. An oceanic white-tip shark appeared around midday, circling in wide arcs beneath and beside the raft. Dante and Samir observed it in silence at first, believing that speaking about it would draw more attention to it. The oceanic whitetip is not a coastal animal. They do not ambush in the manner of a great white. They are persistent, investigative, and capable of sustaining interest in a potential food source for hours. When food is scarce in the open ocean, which it almost always is, an oceanic whitetip does not leave. By the third hour, it circled closer, occasionally bumping the raft hard enough to shift their weight. Samir, experienced in open water sailing, recognized the white-tipped dorsal and rounded snout as a white-tip shark. He told the others to stay still and keep their hands out of the water. There was no ranger station, no warning system, only Samir's repeated instructions and Dante's agreement. By hour 5, the combined heat stress, exhaustion, and dehydration were looking like it was affecting Joran's judgment. His lips were split, he had stopped producing saliva, he had also become fixated. He told the others that the shark was only still there because they were passive, that if someone went in and grabbed it, forced contact, it would register them as a threat and leave. Dante told him that was not how it worked. Samir told him to sit down. Joran sat down. Then the shark made another slow pass, barely 3 feet from the edge of the raft, its dorsal breaking the surface, and Joran went in. He entered feet first on the left side. Witnesses said he got both hands around the caudal fin for less than 2 seconds before the shark accelerated hard and pulled away, dragging him forward and submerging him briefly. He came up coughing. For approximately 8 seconds, nothing happened. Then it came from directly below. The first strike severely damaged and partially removed his left calf. The bite was not a test, it was a full compression, and the shark shook twice before releasing. Joran screamed and tried to swim back to the raft. Dante reached for his arm. The shark returned before Joran reached the raft edge. The second strike hit the right thigh. The third, around 40 seconds later, caught his left hip as Dante and Samir were pulling him up by both arms. He was partially over the side when the fourth bite reached his lower abdomen. The blood loss at that point was visible in the water, a spreading dark stain the color of rust. His crewmates got him mostly aboard. He was conscious for a short time, then not. Samir activated the beacon. A merchant vessel arrived around 6 hours and 15 minutes later. Joran Vale had been dead for approximately 2 of those hours.
His surviving crewmates gave statements to maritime investigators in Colombo 3 weeks later.
There is not much to say about Joran's decision that his crewmates did not already say while it was happening. He was told. He knew the shark was there.
The ocean does not negotiate. An oceanic white-tip does not scare.
It was July 22nd, 2015, several miles offshore from Nassau in the Bahamas, where a private yacht sat anchored under a clear night sky. The water was black beyond the reach of the vessel's lights, the kind of darkness that makes the ocean feel still and harmless from the deck of a well-lit boat. The party had been going for hours. Music, alcohol, the easy confidence that comes from being somewhere beautiful. It was the kind of night where warnings feel like overreactions. Adriana Velasquez, 31, was a travel consultant from Miami who built her professional identity around luxury experiences and a carefully curated social media presence. She had a consistent pattern of treating safety guidelines as suggestions that applied to less experienced people. She had dismissed warnings on previous trips, and nothing had ever gone wrong, and that track record had become its own kind of evidence in her mind. Crew members had issued repeated warnings throughout the night. Fishing vessels operating farther offshore routinely discarded bait and organic waste into the surrounding waters, attracting sharks after dark, particularly oceanic whitetips. Oceanic whitetips can reach lengths of 13 feet and weigh over 370 pounds. These species are OE of the largest shark species in open ocean environments. They are known for their persistent investigations, especially around floating objects, and they can become very opportunistic when a bait has entered the water. They are drawn to irregular surface movement, low-frequency vibrations, and reflective or high-contrast visual stimuli, especially in low-light conditions. Adriana entered the water wearing reflective jewelry and a metallic silver swimsuit. She splashed repeatedly while posing and gradually drifted farther from the vessel than she intended. The yacht's lights created a sharp contrast zone at the surface, exactly the kind of visual environment that amplifies a shark's sensory response at night. What I think gets people forget in situations like this is that distance matters. People assume that as long as the boat is visible, they're close enough to be safe. But Adriana had drifted, and by the time the situation became clear on deck, the gap between her and the vessel had already made a fast rescue nearly impossible. The attack came without extended warning. An oceanic whitetip struck her lower leg, causing severe femoral damage and immediate heavy blood loss. Witnesses heard screaming and saw additional movement beneath the surface almost immediately. Crew members threw flotation rings and ropes into the water, but visible predator activity made it impossible for anyone to safely enter. The crew eventually pulled Adriana aboard using ropes, but the blood loss during recovery was already beyond what could be managed on deck. She died before emergency responders reached the marina. The crew's decision not to enter the water was the right one. Entering dark offshore water with an active oceanic whitetip in the area doesn't save the victim. It creates a second one. The crew did what they could from the deck, and it still wasn't enough. That's what happens when the situation has already moved past the point where effort can change anything. What stands out in nighttime swimming incidents is how quickly the risk compounds. It wasn't just one factor. It was the darkness, the offshore conditions, the alcohol, the reflective clothing, the distance from the vessel. Each of those things alone might not have been fatal. Together, they created a situation with almost no margin for survival. Adriana had been warned specifically about why the water was dangerous that night. The reason she entered anyway wasn't ignorance. It was the belief that the rules didn't apply to her. The incident triggered legal proceedings over enforcement of nighttime swimming restrictions aboard private charters in the area. The yacht operator faced scrutiny for failing to physically prevent passengers from entering the water after repeated warnings.
January 30th, 2021. The Lower Clarence River, New South Wales, Australia. The kind of summer evening where the heat refuses to break even after the sun drops. The air still thick as the last light faded across the water. 22-year-old Kalen Mitchell, known to everyone as Mitch, looked at that river the way he always did, like it was his. By the time anyone on that boat understood what was happening, it was already over. Mitch worked as a deckhand on a small commercial crabbing vessel operating the brackish tidal waterways of the Clarence River. Long shifts, early mornings, physical work in heat and mud. He had been doing it long enough that the river felt routine to him, which was, if you know anything about this region, exactly the wrong way to feel about it. He was known among his co-workers for a specific kind of confidence that crossed into carelessness. Mitch regularly dismissed warnings about estuarine predators in the Clarence River, treating the waterway the way most people treat a backyard pool. His co-workers had raised it more than once. He was not the type to adjust. There is a version of that attitude that looks like toughness from the outside. Sometimes it even is. But in a tidal river system that connects directly to the sea, that attitude stops being tough and starts being a different thing entirely. The moment Mitch crossed that line, the river felt like it had been waiting for him all along. The crew worked a 12-hour shift. Then they parked the boat in the lower part of the river just before sunset. The water looked dark and muddy. You could not see anything below the surface. The sun set low on the horizon, making long shadows across the water. Sunset on a muddy river that leads straight to the open ocean. That is one of the most dangerous times for shark encounters in Australian rivers. People had warned Mitch about this part of the river. He got in the water anyway and started swimming across. Bull sharks are the only shark species capable of living and actively hunting in completely fresh water, moving freely between ocean and river systems through tidal inflows. The Clarence River has a well-documented history of bull shark presence in its lower reaches, particularly during summer months when warmer water pushes larger individuals further upstream. A mature bull shark reaches 8 feet in length and over 300 pounds. They are not ambush hunters. They are persistent, reactive, and in zero visibility, turbid water, they respond to movement and vibration with a speed that leaves almost no window for anything else. People on the boat saw something sudden happen beside Mitch. About halfway across the channel, the shark hit him from below, a hard bump. Then right away, a bite to his upper thigh and groin. The bite cut a main artery in his leg. When that artery is cut, you bleed out fast. There is no long fight. Your body cannot deal with that kind of damage. It just stops. Mitch screamed. He tried to turn back toward the boat. The crew could see him. They threw flotation devices into the water and shouted his name. The water was black with sediment, and the light was nearly gone, and within a very short time, Mitch stopped moving toward them and did not come back up. His body was recovered downstream the following day. Investigators noted that the combination of dust conditions, turbid water, active tidal flow, and confirmed bull shark presence in that section of the Clarence River created near ideal conditions for a predatory encounter. The findings listed it as a fatal, unprovoked bull shark attack. Accurate, clinical, contained in a paragraph. What that report does not say is the part I keep coming back to. The Clarence River had been what it was for decades. The warnings were not new, not vague, and not hard to find. Mitch had heard them from the people who worked alongside him every single day. He chose a different version of that information, and the river had absolutely no interest in that version. The Clarence River took Mitch in under 2 minutes. Dark water, no warning, no second chance.
It was March 9th, 2014, at a remote reef break known locally as Drift Rock Point along South Africa's southern coastline. The nearest town lay several miles away, and access required travel down a narrow coastal road that ended above rocky cliffs and tidal channels. A small regional surf event was underway near the mouth of a tidal river, where murky estuarine water mixed with the open Indian Ocean. Varick Dunn, 38, was a heavily built man weighing approximately 357 pounds. He worked long shifts at a regional freight depot in a nearby coastal city, maintaining vehicles and handling heavy industrial loads. Surfing was not his primary sport, but in recent years he had taken it up recreationally as a personal challenge. He entered the competition after paying a modest entry fee, treating it as an unusual break from routine rather than a competitive pursuit. His longboard was reinforced and visibly worn, with personal markings near the leash plug from years of use. The kind of board that tells more about persistence than style. The event proceeded with limited in-water safety coverage, relying primarily on shore observation and a small number of support personnel. Conditions included choppy surf, shifting currents near the reef edge, and reduced visibility in the water column due to sediment and wave agitation. Temperatures remained mild, influenced by intermittent coastal upwelling that brought cooler water into the surf zone. Varick paddled out in the early afternoon and joined the rest of the lineup near the outer reef. He stayed low on his board, legs hanging in the water, shifting every so often with a few small paddles as the current moved him around. People kept drifting and trading spots between sets, and before long he'd edged a bit away from the main group without really noticing. Beneath him, a large, great white shark moved through deeper water along the reef edge, following natural movement corridors where bait fish concentrations shifted with current flow. The shark rose from depth towards surface activity associated with the surf lineup, responding to vibration, splashing, and movement above. Great whites along South Africa's southern coastline often move along reef edges and current lines where bait fish gather, especially near river mouths where visibility drops from sediment mixing into the surf. In conditions like that, surfers sitting low on boards can create silhouettes and surface vibration patterns that great whites investigate from below before briefly surfacing and turning away again. Witnesses later described a sudden explosion of water beneath the surfer before he was thrown from the board. The shark appeared only briefly at the surface, before disappearing again beneath the turbulence. The impact caused immediate chaos in the lineup. Nearby surfers moved away quickly, paddling towards safer spacing as the water surface became heavily disturbed. The shark remained in the vicinity for a short period, moving just below the surface and reacting to continued movement and turbulence in the water column, before gradually withdrawing into deeper water along the reef edge. Even in chaos, the water can go quiet again faster than people expect. A rescue craft was launched within minutes of the incident, but visibility had already been compromised by churned water, floating debris, and dispersing surf activity. Responders reached the general area shortly afterward, though the immediate impact zone had shifted slightly due to current movement and drifting equipment. Search operations began with event safety personnel and assisting support craft. Varick Dunn was later found downstream from where it happened. His board and gear were separated and partly submerged along the reef line, carried there by the current. Medical assessment confirmed fatal traumatic injuries, consistent with a large, great white shark attack, with death occurring rapidly due to catastrophic hemorrhage and severe soft tissue trauma. No prolonged survival window was indicated based on field evaluation. In the aftermath, the Regional Surfing Association suspended competition events at the location pending review of safety procedures and environmental conditions. A brief local report documented the fatal incident during competition conditions, noting the presence of a large predatory shark in the surf zone. The case was later recorded in marine incident databases as a confirmed great white shark encounter, resulting in a fatality involving a 357-pound surfer in a competitive lineup environment. Over time, the incident remained referenced within the local surfing community as an example of how rapidly conditions in dynamic reef systems can change, particularly in regions where river outflow, reef structure, and open ocean predators overlap in close proximity. April 29, 2015. The water at Ahihi-Kinau Bay sat flat and clear along Maui's southwest shore. No wind, no chop, just warm, still water that made snorkeling feel completely safe. It was exactly the kind of morning that brings people back to the same spot again and again. Margaret Cruz had been back many times. Everyone called her Maggie. She was 65, a retired librarian from Kihei on Maui's western side. She had taken up snorkeling later in life and found something in it she kept coming back to. The quiet, the closeness to the reef. She was not aggressive about the water. She was cautious by nature, someone who planned carefully and almost always went in with company. That morning, she had 2 friends with her. They entered together near the Ahihi-Kinau Natural Area Reserve, a protected coastal zone she had visited before. I keep thinking about this. Maggie was not a tourist in unfamiliar territory. She was a local who knew this coastline, and I think that familiarity is exactly what lowered her alertness without her realizing it. A place that has always felt safe stops triggering the caution it actually deserves. The group drifted apart. This happens on snorkel trips more than people expect. A fish holds your attention a few seconds too long. A light current nudges you sideways, and before anyone checks, the gap has grown into something real. By the time Maggie was fully separated, she had drifted near a spot locals called Dumps, a surf break inside the reserve. She was floating face down, scanning the reef below her. She was 200 yards from shore, completely alone. There was no single obvious mistake. No moment an outside observer could point to and call the decision that caused this. Just a calm morning and a slow, quiet drift. Tiger sharks are one of the most dangerous sharks in the ocean and are behind some of the deadliest attacks in Hawaiian waters. They cruise through shallow reef zones near the surface, hunting sea turtles, fish, and anything else that moves. A horizontal shape floating near the surface looks almost exactly like their natural prey. In murky water, they close the gap from below so fast that there is basically no warning between them spotting something and making contact. The shark came from below. Maggie had no time to react. The animal drove upward, and its jaws closed across her left shoulder and upper chest in a single strike. The bite tore through her shoulder joint, collapsed into her chest cavity, and caused severe damage across her upper back. I have gone over the details of this case more than once. What gets me is how completely invisible the threat was right up until it was not. No warning, no surface sign, nothing. Other snorkelers noticed Maggie floating face down around 9 in the morning. A face-down snorkeler does not raise an alarm right away. That is the normal position, but she was not moving. When people reached her, the injuries made the situation immediately clear. She was brought to shore by those nearby. Firefighters and paramedics worked on her at the scene. Margaret Cruz was pronounced dead on the sand. She was only 65 years old. Authorities cleared the water from Big Beach to La Perouse Bay, a 2-mile stretch of coastline, and posted warning signs along the shore. She trusted that reef. She had been there before and came home every time. The reef did not change on April 29th. The danger in it simply found her on a morning when no one was close enough to matter. A slow drift, limited visibility, and one strike. Nothing about that looks dangerous until it already is.
It was October 31, 2019, along a rocky kelp forest north of Fort Bragg on the Mendocino coast in California. A gray morning in nearshore waters would end in a fatal shark attack inside dense kelp cover. Soviagnas was 47 years old, a commercial seaweed harvester who had lived on the Mendocino coast for nearly 2 decades after relocating from Portland following a divorce. She worked alone under a state harvesting permit, collecting and drying kelp for sale to a small number of regular buyers. She had a teenage son and lived a quiet, isolated life, structured entirely around coastal work and routine nearshore diving.
To me, this is one of those jobs where being alone in the water isn't unusual. It's just a normal setup.
That morning, she entered a familiar harvest zone through a coastal access trail. The kelp forest was dense and constantly shifting, with limited visibility, steady surge, and light filtering through thick canopy layers, while the reef below dropped into deeper water where large predators moved along the forest edge. Great white sharks are known seasonal visitors to Northern California, especially when marine mammals gather along the coast, and they often move along kelp bed edges where visibility is low and prey tends to concentrate in those murky conditions. Soviag entered the water alone and began harvesting in roughly 15 feet of water, moving slowly through dense kelp with repetitive cutting and bagging motions. She repeatedly surfaced for air before submerging again, with the surrounding vegetation limiting visibility to only a few feet. Roughly an hour into the dive, a large shape moved through the lower kelp column beneath her. The initial contact came from behind and below, a great white shark striking upward in a single, forceful bite that tore into her right side and hip area, driving her downward into dense kelp.
From where I'm looking at, everything was just normal right up until that one moment. Then it's instantly over.
She broke the surface shortly afterward, heavily injured and disoriented, with the sudden loss of stability making it difficult to maintain buoyancy in the surge. Blood spread quickly through the surrounding water as she attempted to orient toward the edge of the kelp bed using her remaining arm and weak kicking motion. The shark did not return after the initial strike. She drifted, partially supported by the kelp canopy and surface surge for a short period before losing the ability to stay afloat. Within minutes, her movements slowed significantly and she became unresponsive in the water. She tried briefly to orient toward the edge of the kelp bed, but the movement never really came together. The injury at her torso made controlled swimming impossible, and she stayed mostly where the surge and kelp held her in place.
I have to pause mentally because in that kind of space, there is no clean separation between water and structure. You get tangled in both at once.
Blood loss and shock set in quickly, and her movement stopped becoming purposeful within moments. The water around her settled into that slow, drifting motion again as she became unresponsive shortly afterward. A kayaker offshore observed movement and disturbance near the kelp edge and paddled toward the area. He reached her within minutes, pulled her partially onto his kayak, and called emergency services over a handheld marine radio. A coordinated rescue response arrived by boat shortly afterward and transferred her to shore before she was airlifted to a regional hospital. Despite rapid evacuation and surgical intervention, her injuries proved fatal due to catastrophic internal trauma and blood loss. Soviag died shortly after arrival at the hospital. Medical assessment documented severe raking lacerations to the lower back and hip, multiple rib fractures, and a deep penetrating bite to the right lateral torso, likely involving the abdominal cavity. Cause of death was listed as hemorrhagic shock secondary to shark-inflicted traumatic injury. The incident was later cited in regional reports on nearshore marine hazards along the Mendocino coast, particularly in relation to seasonal shark movement through kelp forest margins. No further investigation beyond standard reporting was conducted, and there was no sustained national coverage.
It was April 17th, 2016, off the coast of Gansbai, South Africa, where cold Atlantic swells rolled over a reef system long known for one of the densest concentrations of great white sharks on the planet. The water was dark green, visibility limited to perhaps 20 feet in any direction, and somewhere beneath the surface. Apex predators moved in slow, deliberate circles around the bait lines the operator had been running since before sunrise. The boat was small, older than it looked in the photos Nathan had seen online. Nathan Whitlock, 47, was a California-based entrepreneur with a long history of seeking extreme wildlife experiences that licensed operators refused to provide. His wife, Elise, 44, had raised concerns the moment she realized there were no certified guides aboard and no visible safety documentation. Nathan dismissed her. Their son, Carter, 16, idolized his father and mirrored his behavior at every turn. Their daughter, Lily, 13, spent most of the boat ride near the stern, watching the water with an expression that suggested she already knew something was wrong. The operator Nathan had hired was unlicensed, running a modified observation cage from an aging vessel with no certified guides aboard. The cage had been altered, viewing gaps widened for filming angles, structural reinforcements removed, and the emergency latch modified to open faster underwater. None of this was disclosed before they entered the water. Great white sharks are not random attackers. They are highly calculated ambush predators, capable of reaching speeds of 25 miles per hour in short bursts, with one of the strongest bite forces ever measured in a marine predator. They rely on electroreception, lateral line pressure sensing, and acute olfactory detection. In murky parts and chum-heavy conditions, their sensory becomes fully activated. A great white shark, being near an active bait, can trigger their engagement, assess, and respond to the near signal. The dive began without immediate incident. Several great whites circled the bait lines while the family filmed from inside the cage. The operator encouraged closer interaction for more dramatic footage. Carter extended part of his arm through the widened bars toward a passing shark, reaching out the way someone might reach toward an animal at a zoo, operating on the assumption that the barrier made him safe. The shark reacted instantly, turning sharply and biting Carter's forearm. The injury was severe, deep tissue damage and immediate heavy bleeding into the surrounding water. Nathan forced the cage hatch open and pulled Carter partially through the opening to get him to the surface faster. It was the kind of decision that makes complete sense in a panic, and almost none in hindsight. The cage was the only thing separating the family from open water, and Nathan had just removed that separation. What I keep coming back to with this story is how the panic itself became the mechanism of the tragedy. Carter's injury was survivable. Deep tissue trauma to the forearm gives you time if you stay calm, but Nathan didn't stay calm, and honestly, I don't think most parents would. The problem is, the operator had built a situation where one moment of panic was always going to be enough to collapse everything. Once Nathan breached the cage with Carter, the situation became uncontrollable. Blood dispersed into the water column. Movement was erratic, and both of them were now fully exposed. At least one nearby great white moved in, drawn by blood and surface disturbance. Nathan sustained a fatal strike during the ascent. Carter, already severely injured, did not survive the time it took the crew to pull him aboard. The shark wasn't hunting the family. It was responding to stimuli. Blood, movement, erratic splashing that registers as injured prey in open water. The shark didn't create that situation. The operator did, and Nathan opening the hatch completed it. Here's the part that really gets me. The cage modifications weren't oversight. Someone deliberately widened those bars and altered that latch, and every paying guest who stepped onto that boat was trusting someone who had already decided their safety was secondary. Elise remained inside the cage throughout and was brought up alive. Lily, who had stayed near the surface platform, was unharmed. South African authorities later investigated the excursion as an illegal wildlife operation that bypassed every layer of commercial shark diving regulation. The operator's vessel was impounded. Nathan and Carter were repatriated to California. Elise and Lily returned home weeks later. What I find truly heartbreaking in this case is that Lily watched it happen. She was 13 years old on a boat with an unlicensed operator, and she came home without her father and her brother. Every one of those decisions had a different option attached to it, and none of them were taken.
It was November 9, 2017, and the water at Mossel Bay was doing something it rarely does, pulling a crowd toward it instead of away. Zaria Patel was 22, a biochemistry student at the University of Toronto who had deferred her graduate school acceptance by a year to travel. She had been in South Africa for 6 weeks by then, working her way down the coast with a loose itinerary and a habit of documenting everything. Her mother later told journalists that Zarya had read about shark behavior specifically before the trip. I think that detail mattered. She had arrived at Mossel Bay 2 days earlier, staying at a guest house near the point. She was scheduled to fly to Cape Town in 3 days and had already planned which beaches she would photograph there. She had told her friends traveling with her that Mossel Bay was underrated, that the light in the afternoon was better than anywhere she had been. That day, the bait fish had been pushed against the shore break since early morning. By 10:40 a.m., a juvenile great white, later estimated by marine officials at roughly 9 feet, had made several visible passes through the surf close enough that people on the beach could track it between waves. Juvenile great white sharks are regular presences in these near-shore zones, following prey into the shallows. Although they are smaller and less powerful than adults and primarily feed on fish and other relatively small prey, they can still inflict catastrophic injuries if a bite occurs.
The word juvenile refers only to age.
The crowd had grown to several dozen. 2 lifeguards on duty had been moving along the waterline for at least 20 minutes, telling people to step back, repeatedly ordering beachgoers out of the water, and keeping the immediate shoreline clear. One of them, a man named Dion, later said he had specifically told a group of young women near the water's edge to move back twice. The water was knee-deep where they were standing. He had likely assumed they complied. Zarya's friends stayed dry. She waded in. They saw her moving into ankle-deep, then knee-deep water while facing away from the ocean, phone raised. She was angling the shot to capture the shark's dorsal fin, breaking the surface in the background. The shark at that moment was between 15 and 20 feet from her position, visible, active, chasing a concentration of baitfish running parallel to the shore. She crouched slightly to adjust the frame. The water was to her knees. The shark pivoted hard during the chase. This is not unusual behavior. Juvenile great whites change direction explosively when prey scatters, and the baitfish had broken formation and scattered shoreward. As Zarya crouched lower to adjust her shot, a passing wave lifted against her legs and dropped her upper body closer to the surface. The animal came in fast and low, and its jaws closed on the left side of Zarya's face and neck before anyone on the beach had processed what was happening. She went straight backward into the surf. The shark released within seconds and moved off. Bystanders were in the water pulling her toward shore within 30 seconds of impact. The damage to her neck was severe enough that the lifeguards who reached her first recognized immediately that the airway was compromised. Dion applied direct pressure, but she was unresponsive by the time paramedics took over and died before the vehicle reached the hospital. The post-mortem examination listed cause of death as exsanguination and traumatic airway disruption secondary to a single shark bite to the left cervical and mandibular region. The wound depth had reached the carotid artery and jugular vein. Zarya's friends flew back to Toronto with her body in the cargo hold, and none of them have gone into the ocean since.
I can't believe she had read all the research on shark behavior before leaving home, which makes her death not ignorance but overconfidence. And that's somehow even dumber.
August 4th, 2022. Offshore Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The water was flat, the wind light, and the sky clear enough to draw technical dive teams out toward deep wreck sites. 29-year-old Marcus Vance was one of the most experienced divers in the area. What stopped him from coming home that afternoon was something no one on his team expected. Marcus dove deep to film old World War II shipwrecks. He worked with small documentary crews. He usually dove between 200 and 300 feet. At that depth, your thinking gets foggy. You have almost no room for error. One piece of gear fails and it is over before anyone knows what happened. He was careful. He stayed calm when other divers would panic. That day, the wreck sat at about 270 feet. Marcus finished the bottom part fine. Then he started coming up. At those depths, you cannot skip your decompression stops. Your body needs time to let the gas out of your blood safely. Skip that and you get decompression sickness. 60 miles offshore, that usually kills you. Marcus stopped around 70 feet and held still in open water. He waited for his clock to run down. This far offshore, the water is not a coastal environment anymore. It is open Atlantic, and what moves through it at depth belongs to a completely different category of animal than anything found near shore. That distinction rarely appears in wreck diving briefings. It probably should. I want to be direct about something here. Wreck divers spend enormous preparation time on bath management, gas planning, narcosis thresholds, and decompression schedules. The open pelagic environment at 60 miles offshore is a separate ecosystem that gets far less attention in that preparation. Marcus had accounted for every variable his training covered. This one sat outside of it entirely. Oceanic white-tip sharks are a wide-ranging open ocean species that spend most of their time far from surface activity and are only rarely encountered in the offshore waters of the US East Coast. A large shark came toward the ascent line. Nobody on the boat had time to think before things happened fast. The shark came up from deeper water. It did not rush. It moved in a wide, slow circle around the line. Marcus was still blowing bubbles with his gear lights on. Normally, that keeps most sharks away. This one kept getting closer. On one pass, it bit his upper thigh and lower body. The wound was bad. A lot of blood loss right away. Surfacing was an option, but a dangerous one. He still had decompression time left. If he went up early, he could get decompression sickness bad enough to kill him. Going back down was also possible, but he did not have much air left. Every choice looked like it could kill him. That is the worst part. There was no safe way out. Cases like this rarely comes down to a single mistake. They usually happen because several conditions lined up at the wrong time. Decompression stops are not a physical barrier, but leaving early means trading one serious risk for another, and neither option is safe in the same way. This was a routine technical dive, and rescue still had to follow decompression rules before they could respond. Other divers were already in decompression and could not assist without putting themselves in danger. The closest diver began ascending as fast as possible, but it was still not fast enough to reach Marcus in time. By the time Marcus was brought to the surface, blood loss had gone beyond recovery. Resuscitation efforts failed. He was pronounced dead shortly after retrieval. The incident was recorded as a fatal shark encounter during a decompression ascent in offshore Atlantic waters. Marcus was as prepared as anyone working at that level. The variable that ended his life was one that preparation had simply never been designed to address. Some encounters happen in places that look dangerous the moment you arrive.